Hey guys, welcome to the Long Island Legends podcast, and this is the first episode that we're doing. And on these episodes, we are going to interview very important people on Long Island, people that are impacting our community that we know and love, people that you may have never heard about, but people that are probably having some kind of influence on you. And before I start, I want to give you an introduction about me. I'm Marianna Dalton. I'm the owner of Suffolk County House Buyers. If you have a house to sell, or if you know of somebody that could benefit from an all-cash offer with no contingencies, please reach out, let us know. You can call us at the number below, 631-333-SELL. Pretty easy to remember, 631-333-SELL. And again, this is a house that's not listed, but would benefit from a cash offer. It may not necessarily need work, but perhaps the seller needs to close on what we call their terms, their timeline, and their way. And if you refer us over a house, for the first house you refer, we pay $5,000. For the second house, we pay $10,000. And for the third house, we will actually split the profits with you. And some of our profits are multiple six figures. So your end of the deal could be life-changing. So please take advantage of that opportunity. So without further ado, we talk about having legends on Long Island, people that are influencing the community. And I would be remiss, first guest that I didn't have on this episode would be none other than my wife and my attorney in all our real estate transactions, Marianna Dalton. Marianna, welcome to the show.
Thanks, babe.
So, a little background about us, and of course you can stop me because I have been accused many times of taking over the conversation. It's probably something I'll have to work on as a podcast host, but we met actually in law school in 2007. You wanted to be a lawyer. I did not want to be a lawyer. I actually wanted to be like a builder, developer, flipper. That was like one of our first conversations. I did not go down that route at first. I kind of found my way amongst different jobs, legal and non-legal, but whatever I could do to best support our family. And then about 2015, 2016, I really started to implement the things that I was just reading about and learning about. And slowly and surely, the business started to grow. And then I went out on my own. And then right after you joined and started your own practice, and you now obviously service all of our transactions in addition to private clients of your own. So you're here to kind of tell the story. And more importantly, I think for people that are watching and may know us, sort of how do we balance this crazy real estate world, dealing with transactions on Long Island in New York that are not easy while, having a family, managing 3 kids. And somehow I would like to think after close to 15 years of marriage, being still liking each other.
Right. But I think you kind of left out a little bit of the background where we met in law school and we had our icebreaker conversation where you said, I don't really want to be an attorney. And I said, well, why are you here?
That's right.
So
my parents kind of forced me.
Tell the truth. You were there to meet a nice Jewish girl.
Even though I'm not Jewish.
I know, but who doesn't like a nice Jewish girl?
I guess there's a point to that.
So
I was thinking of a nice girl. Religion didn't play a role in it. I just want to be clear. It could have been Jewish, could have been any religion. I was open. I had an open mind.
So you were there to meet a girl.
I was there to meet a girl, yes.
All right. So the first truth comes out. But the second part of the story is that even though we were still in school, our journey in real estate started well before we took the bar, well before we even became attorneys. So one of the things that we decided early on in our relationship was, why don't we move in together? We're spending all of our time together anyway. And when we started looking at rentals, they were very expensive, much how they are now for people looking for, someplace to rent. And you had this crazy light bulb idea and said, well, why don't we just buy a place?
Mm-hmm. I did. That was in 2008 where things were really starting to get squirrely. Not exactly the best time to buy.
But
don't regret it.
But what do you say whenever I say, well, what would you tell someone when was the best time to buy a house?
30 years ago, and the second best time right now. Yes.
Right. So
although I have to say that might have been an exception in 2008, to be fair. Now, for those that are watching this, we still own that condo today that we bought together and lived in and moved out and bought the house that we live in now. But and that's appreciated, and obviously quite a bit, and we've paid down the mortgage, and so there's a substantial amount of equity. But if you are talking about market timing, you probably could have gotten a much better deal. You don't know. The problem is that you don't know. But in
We don't know,
hindsight, if
but
I had to do it over, probably could have, gotten it much cheaper in 10 or 9 or
where
10.
would we have lived? We would
Exactly.
have burned
Where would you
thousands
live?
and
So
thousands of dollars in
that's
rent
yeah.
that we wouldn't have seen back,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So our journey in real estate started with a very tiny down payment that we actually borrowed from our student loans
Yes.
that was allocated towards housing. I mean, it was still housing.
It was.
But we put a tiny down payment down on this condo. We got a free flat screen TV out of it.
Yes,
that was
at
a
the
big
time,
deal.
at the time, flat screen TVs were like several $1,000s, and we got a free, and that was the first flat screen TV I ever had in my life. You know what I mean? So that was pretty cool to say the least. Yeah,
But
I don't know why I was so excited about that at the time, but I was.
But then our journey in real estate still continued because I ended up getting a job for a real estate for a REIT
That
real
owned
estate- that owned our building.
That owned our building, yes.
And I saw how much commissions these rental
Yes.
agents were getting. And by the time we graduated, we were trying to put a down payment on a house, but we had these crazy student loans, and we learned very quickly the term DTI
Yes.
and realized that we either needed a third stream of income or a sister wife. But you were not interested in the sister wife idea.
You didn't bring that up, so to
Well,
be
Big
fair.
Love was
Mhm.
on, I think, HBO at the time.
yeah.
I did make that joke, but
I don't remember that joke.
well, anyway.
I don't remember that.
So we started moonlighting,
Yes, as real estate agents in Harlem, renting apartments. Yes.
and that was extremely lucrative.
Yeah.
At the time, we were able to save a down payment on a house.
Yeah, I mean, for context, we bought the house in 2012 for $490,000. We put over $100,000 down. We put 20% down. We were able to get the best rate possible. Obviously, and we bought the house in 2012, was kind of the bottom of the market. You know what I
Right.
mean? It really only went up after that. If that same house in the condition that it was in, if it went today the way it was, just needed a full rehab, probably would have gone for $1 million.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well,
just the way it was.
But that's what I'm saying. Like I think both of our interest in real estate from the start kind of shaped the entire trajectory of our lives because, you were born here. I wasn't born here. I was born to immigrant parents, but we genuinely, maybe what people don't know about you or about me or us as a couple is that we literally started together from zero, from scratch. We started under a mountain of student loans, splitting $5 foot-long Subway sandwiches for lunch,
Yeah.
and we're genuinely broke. So like we really did live very modestly to scrape together our down payment for our house.
did.
We worked
Going out to dinner was like a big deal. Like,
it was a big deal.
like if we went to like Red Lobster, that was like
yeah.
kicking it, like,
Well, I remember you used to pack us lunch every day to save money. We were really, really frugal with our expenses. We lived in a studio apartment, and we worked 7 days a week. I remember coming home from our real jobs at this
Yeah.
point, us being licensed attorneys and listing apartments in Harlem on Craigslist on Friday nights. That was our
Yeah.
Friday night at home, listing apartments. And
then showing them Saturday and Sunday. And it was like, it was a big deal for us because, some of these apartments they were renting, let's just say $1,300 to $1,500. We would get 1 month's rent as commission. So if I rented 2 apartments a weekend, which was a good weekend, didn't happen every weekend, but it was fairly consistent, it was $3,000, right? And we kept doing that, and we just kept stashing that money away, and then ultimately, put it down on the house. So yeah, no, you're right.
And then honestly, and I don't even know how we did that. We worked 7 days a week because when the showings turned into applications, we would end up doing those lease signings literally at night after we got out of work, after our prospective client got out of work. We'd be meeting up at Starbucks and pizzerias and coffee shops in the city to get these leases signed and FedEx or hand delivered to the landlord.
Yes.
So, I mean, it was like a Herculean undertaking. But again, like, even though it was rentals and now we don't do rentals and you do more acquisitions, you have to start somewhere. And I think just even from that first condo that we didn't really look so much at as an investment, but more as like a place to live, we need a place to live. To then saying we need a bigger place to live and let real estate be the path that takes us there. And
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely that. I mean, we worked hard. we bought a house at a time that we knew was a good time to buy. I mean, no matter what. I mean, at that point in 2012, like the worst of the market was over. I don't think anybody anticipated the type of appreciation that we would have over the next, 13 years. But we knew at that point it was a good investment. It was a good area.
I mean, we had like 3 houses in our price range to pick from at that time. We just kept hitting refresh on the MLS in hopes that
Well, to be
something
fair,
else would pop up.
that house sat for a while. In my opinion, was poorly marketed. It did not. The photos they took. If you had those photos today, and nothing against the people that sold the house, because
They were nice people.
they were really, really nice people. But the photos that they took, if you had those photos today,
Right.
like people on social media would actually make a mockery of it. They were bad. And it didn't really showcase what the house was. We didn't want to go. You didn't want to
I
go
didn't
to
wanna-
that house.
Well, I
You
think-
said, because we were living in Jersey, you're like, I'm not trekking out there. I'm like, Marianna, I've seen this house. They've dropped the price now 2 times. I said, why we've been striking out left and right. Let's go see it. And you were like, no. And then we walked in and you were like, oh my God,
Well-
despite it needing a ton of work.
Right.
But that's my point. The agent did not market the property correctly. And really, we should have bought it for it should have sold for more than it did.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that shows you obviously why, who you align yourself with. And as silly as taking proper pictures makes a big deal.
Do you want to sidetrack for a second? And how did we even end up on Long Island? I mean, how did we end up in Centerport?
Well,
I think
you were
that's
Googling areas with good downtowns because we lived in Jersey by Hoboken, so we didn't want to lose the downtown. He said, what's an area with a good downtown and good schools? Harbor Fields came up because it was near Huntington, and then we were looking at Huntington and Harbor Field schools. And at this point, our commute, like Centerport, was as far as we could go because where we were working wasn't going to allow us to go any further east. And even Centerport, was a bit of a trek, I remember looking at some houses in Centerport that were like 5 minutes further west and being like, ooh, it'll be 5 minutes less each way on my commute.
So you were commuting to Astoria at the time. You were originally raised on Staten Island. I was raised in Queens. So neither of us had any ties to Long Island whatsoever.
Well, that's not
I went
fair.
to Stony
You
Brook.
went to Stony Brook, so
And-
you definitely had something. And you kept talking about
Because-
moving to Long Island.
I loved it. When I lived in Stony Brook, I really just fell. I fell.
And
in
to
love
be fair,
with
I
the
was like, I
North.
don't like Long Island because my only association with Long Island being a Staten Island kid and the times that we would go to Long Island would be seeing like the South Shore. And on it, to be fair, like southwestern Long Island, like Nassau County, I'm thinking like Merrick, Valley Stream, like things of that nature just didn't appeal to me. Nothing against those areas. Like
And some people love those areas.
some people like it. It just kind of looked some way similar to Staten Island, right? Then when we went out there and I was like, oh, I see now what you're talking about. It was like an entirely different world. That's when you kind of sold me and, I was on board, But it's a
Right.
very, very different look. And there's nothing wrong with one or the other. And I understand.
No, I think you were just drawn to more of like the New Englandy vibe and the
Yeah, I
windy
was.
roads and the sailboats and like the picturesque little downtowns. Like when we went to Northport, I think on Northport Family Night for the first time when we moved here,
Yeah.
we felt like it wasn't even real. Like you felt like you're walking in through some kind of movie set.
Yeah. It reminded me of like the show Dawson's Creek. Like
Right.
it reminded me of like that kind of town, So yes, and we obviously made the offer. I remember negotiating down. I think that house was listed. Our house was listed for like $560. They dropped it to $540, and then they dropped it to $519, and I got them down to $490, which nowadays is like unheard of.
I think we had like 75 cents left in our bank account the day
It
we
wasn't that
closed.
bad. It wasn't that bad, but it
pretty-
was close.
Well, we got the check back.
Yes, because people don't know this is because we had a broker license. We actually represented ourselves in the transactions and got a commission, which we then took that money and we used to kind of paint the house and refinish the floors just to make it a little bit, more appealing.
And we painted it ourselves.
We painted it
I
we
painted it.
painted it ourselves, but I redid the floors. We did,
Yeah.
we did some work. And then, obviously we lived in the house sort of the way it was, for a number of years. And while we
a
talked,
decade almost.
not quite a decade, but
Felt like a decade.
it may have felt like a decade, but it wasn't. In fairness, we almost kind of took a little bit of a break from real estate, right? We sort of enjoyed our lives after that. And I think,
Well, I guess you did. I feel like I've been tangentially somehow involved in real estate
Yeah, because of your career and
Right.
obviously working at a foreclosure defense firm before you went out to, on your own to, start doing
It
real
was
estate.
not foreclosure defense. We were on the
Or,
plaintiff
yeah,
side.
plaintiff
Yeah.
side, excuse me. Yeah, so, but as far as like real estate investing is concerned, we had kind of taken a break. At that point, it was like, okay, we've got our house. Let's enjoy our house. Let's enjoy our
Well,
time.
what year did we start going to Lyria? And we
We
ended up,
we went to Lyria as soon as we bought the house. I
so
remember this.
2012.
We went there as soon as we bought the house. We kind of like, poked around with it, but we didn't really do anything. So this is
But
really
we did.
we didn't do anything with it. No, 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 no. So this is where I remember distinctly.
All right, I have a bad, hazy memory when it comes
So
to stuff
we
like
looked
this.
into it. There were some different coaching programs, and we were like, I don't think this is for us. Now, here's what I will tell people who are out there, right? Is I'm not saying you should go into coaching, but I am saying if you want to take action, you have to really take action right away. So one of my biggest regrets was not taking action sooner. So from like 2013 to 16, right? 3-year period. In that time, we were just, we were enjoying the house. Hurricane Sandy had hit shortly after we moved in. So the real estate landscape changed literally, right? So there was that. We were
We
just
took
kind
a
of
couple
settled.
trips.
We took some trips. We were settling to the house. We started a family. It wasn't really until Isla was born and we weren't really around for her the way we wanted to be that I was like, something has got to change. I've got to either figure out how to make enough money because this time your income and my income together is what we needed to survive. I've got to be able to make enough money in real estate on the side that if you want to work less hours and be home, you can. Or I've got to make enough money that I could leave the job entirely, right? And the funny thing happened was like both sort of, transpired as I had started to make enough money in real estate flipping houses that I was actually making more with that than I was at my job. And then we took the leap of faith and I left. And then,
Well, I mean, there was 2 other kids in between. There's
well,
3
well,
kids
well,
total.
no,
Yeah.
there was one other kid. So then we had our second child in January of 17, right? So then in 18, I left. Okay. But you were pregnant with Grayson. So we
Yes.
had a
Okay.
third on the way. So
Okay.
for people out there that want to take the leap and get into real estate, and you have a family, I hear you. I feel you. I know exactly what that fear is because I had 2 kids with a third on the way,
A mortgage,
a
student
mortgage,
loans,
student loans, the whole 9
the whole
yards.
nine.
But I had built enough in my business. So this is where it's key. 2 pieces of advice. One, make sure that you dive in and you start taking action because I do regret that those couple of years where I didn't take action,
Do
right?
you? I mean,
Oh
we
yes,
needed but
100%.
we needed a break. I mean, how long could we go working 7 days a
But
week? Like,
and I didn't have
60-hour,
to be that
80-hour
though.
weeks.
But I should have dove into understanding how to flip houses on Long Island. Basically, when I decided that I was going to do it, within 6 months I bought my first house,
Right.
right? But to be fair, like there was that period in between where I was not doing that, right? Now, that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is for those that want to quit their jobs is don't quit too early. I did quit right at the right time, but I was making more in our real estate business than I was at my regular job.
And then we also had an agreement that we had made between the 2 of us that, I'm a nervous Nelly.
Still are.
Still am. Always was. Always will be. But obviously, being pregnant, my hormones raging, and having 2 toddlers at home, we had agreed that we were going to keep working our respective jobs until we had like a year of living expenses
Yeah.
saved up, just
Yeah.
in case things
Yeah.
didn't shake out how we wanted to.
Yes. And so obviously, that worked out. And then within 6 months of me going out on my own, you had said, you know what, I really can't do it anymore. Because even though I was around more, like your job just became like much more stressful and more physically taxing with all the, places you had to go
Commuting.
to
Yeah, we had
for
a
court.
50-mile radius basically from Northport.
Yeah.
So that brought me, Bronx, Brooklyn,
At
Westchester.
the time, she's pregnant, right? So we had agreed after it was a few months after our third child was born. She said, I can't do this anymore. And so she took the leap of faith. Now, to be fair, at that point, my business was starting to gain some traction. Obviously, like I said, I was making more with that than I was with my regular job. It was a bit of a risk for you to leave, but it's funny. It's like you almost never skipped a beat. You know what I mean?
Well, because COVID happened.
Well,
right? Shortly thereafter.
6 to 8 months later, COVID happened. Now you had my transactions. You were starting to get referrals from other people. I was building relationships and people were
Right.
referring you business. So I really did feel like you didn't skip a beat, but now, we both run two successful real estate businesses. We have three small children. We're fortunate to be around for them. But it came with, a lot of risk tolerance, I will have to say, and a lot of sleepless nights, and a lot of times where we had to put in the extra time, and we still do. Like, I will always put in the extra time
And I
because I
have
will
like,
never want to lose what we have, so I'll never risk the
right.
opportunity to go the extra mile, because I never want to look back and say to myself, like, well, I lost it because I wasn't willing to work hard enough to keep it.
Right.
That's important.
And I mean, I think both of us are like that, That's why I travel with my laptop in tow, because
Yes, yes.
I don't ever want anything to go off the rails or skip a beat.
Yes,
I
yes. And you'll have an Uber driver bring you a laptop to, the Polynesian in Disney, so that you can continue working when the first laptop craps out on the plane on the way to Florida. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the beauty of, obviously, the world we live in, and that's a true story. The laptop crapped out on the way to Florida. She's like, I don't know what to do. I was like, I'm telling you, you can DoorDash a new laptop now.
Well, I ordered it actually directly from the Apple store, but I selected the 2-hour delivery,
Yeah.
and it got delivered like basically poolside to the
Yeah,
Polynesian by an
right,
Uber
right when we
Eats
got to the
driver.
hotel, and she took out the laptop and just kept working without really, like I said, missing a beat. So we're fortunate to be living in the world that we live in, with technology at our fingertips and all the additional support that we have, and so I'm very grateful for that. And I think that was like a refreshing or sobering moment, because you were really upset. You were like, I can't be without my laptop. I said, don't worry, you can get another one. I promise you. You know what I mean? And so, but that's like our world. It's always going the extra mile, like making sure that, whatever it is we need to just keep our businesses going, we do. And that doesn't mean that we shortchange our kids in the process. We're doing this so that we can continue this lifestyle that we had, because we both know what the other side of it is, right?
But the flip,
Answering to a boss, not being
right.
able to leave when you want,
But the
right?
flip side of it is not that we're just working like this now. We were both always very hard workers. When you had your, W-2 job and I had my W-2 job, I worked my ass off for that firm as if it was my own.
Sure.
I put in the hours as if it was my own. It took a while for that light bulb to go off, that I am literally working myself to the bone, like to build someone else's business,
Yeah. And
and
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? Because, like, to be fair, right? Like, I have people inside my organization that work very hard but like, if I always make sure that the business can't just serve me, it has to serve the people that's supporting it, right?
but I don't think we worked at places with
Exactly.
employers that recognize
Exactly.
that.
So there's nothing wrong with that. I want to be clear for, like, those who are working, like, for somebody else. If that person is considering your needs and providing things for you that you can't get elsewhere, then it's worth staying.
100, I
But
would
in
have
your
never left. I would
Exactly.
have never left.
Yeah.
If I had the flexibility to be a mom and to be a wife and to still be a great attorney, and I think I was a great attorney. I worked extremely hard. I tried to bring in business. I stayed late. I did whatever. I had a very much a whatever it takes attitude. But, once in a while, you need to take a day to take your kid to the pediatrician, or you want to leave early to see the kids' school show. And I think nowadays more and more employers are kind of getting with the program, especially after COVID, and realizing that people can do things remotely, and people also need to be parents and see, be a part of their children's lives. But we were both working in very like old school structured environments where our environments never evolved. So
No.
eventually we had to leave almost out of necessity because our backs were against the wall. We either had to make the choice between being a good employee and a good parent. And
Yeah.
nowadays people shouldn't have to choose.
Yeah. And I think, right now, like, kids need both parents. Kids, obviously, I think it's important that they see, how hard, we work, that the nice things that we have. And listen, I'm gonna, take a moment to say, like, our kids live a very charmed life. maybe too charmed if we're being quite frank here. And, we go on really nice vacations and, it's the best places to go and the best hotel rooms. And, we never have to say almost no to anything, which has its perks, but also, at least I feel sometimes it's detriment. But
It
that comes
definitely
from,
does.
working and going the extra mile and, not taking it for granted too at the same time.
And I think a lot of people struggle with this on Long Island, right? There's a lot of families here, probably an inordinate amount, doing well, that maybe didn't grow up with all of these perks and privileges, and you want to give everything to your kids, but it's almost impossible to like emulate that type of grit that we had inherently. It's hard to instill that in them without the actual struggle that goes along with it.
Yeah, yeah. And so, that's why, especially with the sports, like I will challenge them, because I want them to develop that grit, the ability to overcome the obstacles and when your back's against the wall. And listen, I'll be the first to say, like, yes, we make our own schedule. Yes, we provide a great life for our kids. And yes, we're around for them, right? But like a lot of sleepless nights. Right? There's a lot of uncertainty. We talked about this last night. There's a lot of uncertainty in our business, no matter how good it's going. There's always, when's the shoe going to drop? What's going to happen? Right. And so that fear, right? You have to be able to handle it and tolerate it. I didn't always handle it as well as I used to. Um,
Neither did I.
yes, but over time, taking better care of myself and also being a little more used to it, I think those factors played a role in me tolerating it a lot better, but that wasn't always the case. And so, I think for the others, people have to understand that it's all not all sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot that you have to be able to tolerate, and there's a lot of mental stress that goes along with it, which is why I don't necessarily apologize for doing nice things because I know what I've had to put myself and continue to put myself through to get there.
Right.
I think that's really important. So let's now jump into sort of you kind of as an attorney, because this is obviously an area where, we differ, not in a bad way, right? But, for me, I want to redo a house, put a good product on the market, sell, move on. Obviously, I care about, making sure that whoever buys the house has a good house. I like the business of coordinating people, as you know, right? Probably not as much of your strength, right? But you like handling these legal transactions on behalf of people. Not so much with me, right? Because with me, it's more just kind of business but like the emotional side of working with your normal buyer, your normal seller, like you like that part. You've always found that fulfilling.
I really do. I almost think like I never had the like skill set in the sciences, right, to become a doctor or a nurse. But had I been, I would have wanted to be in like a maternity ward,
Mhm.
or like a labor and delivery and see like a baby being born. But not in the cards for me, but being an attorney that's in the room when somebody buys their first home or sells the home that they raised their family in and ready to start their next chapter. It's something very fulfilling about being a part of somebody's biggest milestone, right? Like next to getting married and having a kid, usually buying a house, a home, a condo, whatever
Yeah,
home
it's a
somebody
big deal.
chooses is a
It's
big
top
deal.
five for sure.
Top five, right? So being a part of that milestone for a family is always very rewarding. I mean, obviously, sometimes it's not as happy times, right? People are divorcing, sometimes families split, but even in back to my, labor and delivery example, it's not always joyous, right? There's sometimes pregnancies lost,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
Pretty
overall,
happy.
it's
Yeah.
pretty happy.
Yeah. And I think, that side of it is that like your attention to detail, the fact that you care, that you always have your client's best interest in mind. And I see this on my end. Like I see you catch things that so many other people miss, right? And that's very, very important for, anybody when you're dealing with the most important, financial transaction of your life, to have somebody that really takes the time and the effort to guide you, make sure that you're protected, but also explain things to you too, and I think that's something that you do very, very well. I know it's not something I
Thanks,
could
babe.
do. I know it's not something that I could do, but I give you a lot of credit. And, I think what I've always felt is that we've both fell into places where we belong. You know what I mean? Like, listen,
I think
I've
so.
flipped hundreds of houses now. I don't want to say it's like old news because I'm not standing here taking it for granted, but like, I know at this point, like, and I knew going into it, I was going to be good at it, right? Like, I knew how to coordinate people. I knew,
Maybe I should have you start scheduling these closings.
maybe I knew how to handle construction, right? I liked real estate. So I knew if I put all those things together, it was going to be worthwhile. And obviously that part of it came true, and not everybody's cut out for this, right? I think the part that I didn't prepare myself enough for was the emotional distress that was going to come along with it. I knew it would be there, but I also didn't know sometimes how intense it could get sometimes. That was something I had to learn over time. And I think for anybody out there, it's like with real estate or when you're dealing with an area that you may not have the expertise in, you could either hire that part out or you could learn to adapt and get better. Like I said, I found a few key traits that I thought would be beneficial to this particular line of work. And then the other areas that I wasn't so, I would say, adept at or just naturally inclined to handle, I worked on getting better, and that's been a big part of it. So as far as, juggling a family, what do you think has been the biggest, I don't want to say the biggest advantage we've had, but what do you look at as the one thing that has helped us raise 3 kids, I'd like to think successfully, and kind of keep it all together? If you had to point to like one thing about our marriage, our family dynamic that makes it work. Now, work is a relative term, right? Because some days
It doesn't always work.
it doesn't always
every
work, but
day.
by and large, we've done all right. What do you think has been the main contributor to that?
I think the dynamics between the two of us, right? It all starts with that. I think from the beginning, like we were just friends, right? And we were best friends for a long time before we had kids. Like we were married, but I'm just saying, aside from being husband and wife, like we laughed
Yeah, just to
together.
be clear, it wasn't like longtime friends that's, became romantically
No,
involved. Yeah.
it was like friends for a little bit that became romantically involved, but like you weren't ever just like my boyfriend or my fiance. You were always my best friend. So, and I think what was always important to me was that like you understood me or like the things that set me off and vice versa. So like I don't do good with yelling. So, which I think people would laugh because I feel like everybody hears you yelling all
Yeah,
the
because
time.
I yell at everybody, and so people understand. Like I grew up in a household where everybody yelled at each other. Like even when my parents weren't fighting with each other, they were still yelling at each other. It's how they communicated. So when people do me wrong, my natural inclination is to yell and scream. I don't do that in my own house. You know what I mean?
So like that was always
Yeah.
something that I think from the beginning I told you like, hey, this is like deal breaker for me, very important to me because I will acknowledge I'm a hypersensitive person. It doesn't take much to get me upset. So
Don't take much at
it
all.
doesn't take much at all. So like, can you work with that? You said yes, and you've like kept that promise. So like,
Not always.
not always,
I'll
but
be
like
fair, not always.
for the most part, like I think even when it's crazy, having that like calm in the sense of like there's no fighting, there's no yelling, there's no constant
Yeah,
conflict in our house,
we obviously have
like-
our disagreements, but even if we do, they're not really in front of the kids too often.
and they're not loud, and it's not like it's more of like this, like a conversation. So I think,
I will yell at the kids though when they're out of line.
well, yeah, I yell
Yeah.
at the kids too.
Yeah,
Everybody
yeah.
yells at their kids. But
Yeah.
I just meant like between each other. I grew up in a household with, and just like you, with a lot of just like yelling back and forth conflict. And I knew I had reached my lifetime quota.
Yeah,
of
me
that
too. I didn't want that either.
before even. So I think that's one of the things, like, you know what you need to do to like get JJ to hockey, and I have to get Isla to cheer. And I think we kind of just divide and conquer and tackle everything. I don't want to say it runs like a well-oiled machine. I mean, sometimes it just like barely runs and we're like pushing the truck up the hill.
Yeah.
But it's all hands on deck
Yeah,
from both of us.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where we're all involved. Our kids have a lot of activities. Depending on the kids, some have more activities than others because, like, for JJ, for instance, like 4 to 5 days a week for hockey is good for him. You know what I mean? So that means I have to take him to hockey 4 to 5 days a week, and it will wear you down. Like these kinds of things can wear you down. And so it's very important, obviously, have the right team behind you in the work environment that got your back, which I do very much feel. And obviously you being a part of that team. Um,
Well, what do you think is the biggest reason? I gave mine.
I think the biggest reason is understanding sort of like why you're doing it all. Aside from the fact, like I said, like when I look at everything inside my business, you being a part of it, all the different people that play a role, right? And everybody doing their job, that allows me to kind of focus, on stuff that maybe the kids need, right? Like we haven't talked about this on camera, but like, we have one son that, has behavioral issues, right? It was like, okay, what's the best way to do it? We started to find that hockey was helping him.
Has or pop, or you could say has or had ever since hockey. It's like a different kid.
Yeah, I mean, it's better. I don't want to say he's a walk in the park, but it's definitely an improvement. So it's like, okay, like how do I do more of this? And so recognizing what works and doing more of what works, you have to be very
I think we
perceptive.
have to have a whole other special showing you installing plastic hockey tiles on our lawn, creating
Artificial grass, to be fair.
artificial ice on our
Artificial
lawn.
ice on artificial grass. Let's be
Yes,
clear.
artificial ice on our. I mean, I think you need a whole other segment.
There's probably is, but like it's like okay, like you have so you, as a parent, like being present, being perceptive to what they need,
Right.
and then go doing more of what will help them and less of what won't help them, right? And I've been guilty of doing more of what didn't help them and then backtracking and saying, okay, that's not productive. What can I do that works? And it's a lot of guessing and testing and patience. And seeing what works and trying things and listen, it takes a village. And yes, we're in a position where we could afford a daily housekeeper and a daily tutor. And, so
Yeah, we've had to buy our village.
we've had to buy our village, right? But that's important because I've always looked and said, okay, financially, how can I get us as financially set as we can while still being available for the kids? Once that was accomplished and saying, okay, now how can I use those finances to bring other people in to help and support? To the point that like we've discussed about hiring me a driver to take me to all these hockey games, not because for the only reason of buying myself an extra half hour on the drive there or back to be able to do extra work, right? And so just finding all those people that can come in and help. So it all goes back to yes, like I don't apologize for like trying to make a lot of money. But then using that money in the right way, not always buying material things, but the right help that could then allow you to be the best parent you can be.
And I think that's somewhere where like we are really aligned on is that like neither of us had any interest to like make more money to buy like a Lamborghini or to buy a mansion or whatever. Like, but we're always both down to invest in a better quality of life.
Yes,
So
100%.
like
And I think that's
a nice trip or a housekeeper, somebody to do the laundry, having groceries delivered.
yeah,
Like I would rather live in a smaller house but have
yeah.
a beautiful life.
No, and somebody told me this once, and it's a great piece of advice. First, you focus on income, then you focus on stability, then you focus on growth. A lot of people want to skip the first two steps and talk about growth as far as like buying rentals and investments, and all that's great. But for a while it was just about income. Now we've been taking that income and attempting to buy stability with it, right? And now as the stability comes, now we're starting to talk about growth, right?
Right.
And like where can we invest our money so that we can continue to later on not have to always worry about the income and have our investments, give us the same quality of life. But people skip the first two steps. They skip the income, they skip the stability, and they want to go right to the growth. And you have to be, open to hiring people that can help you. And just our business and everything we do, like your household is a separate business. It really is. And it needs separate people to help you. And you have to focus on the things that you're good at. It's not beneficial for me. I will help the kids with their homework, but like there's better people to handle that than me. But when the time comes and I need to do it, I will do it, but my thing is, I know, all right, taking JJ, taking the kids to their sports, giving them their feedback on how they can get better. No one's going to do a better job of that than me, right?
Right.
And that's where I need to sort of focus my time. And that could just be sports. It could be how they're behaving, and identifying those things, I think, is definitely key. All right, so we'll wrap up this episode. Before we do wrap up, is there any words of wisdom that you have not only for the audience, but for me?
I think have patience with yourself and with others. Businesses aren't grown overnight. It takes a lot of sometimes mistakes and missteps. And out in the world, be kind.
Be out in the world, be kind. Yes. And I think there's one thing we want to close with this. We're both guilty of this, is you've got to be willing to make mistakes. And you can't beat yourself up when you make those mistakes. You're probably worse at that than I am, right? Like when you make a mistake, you hate making mistakes, but those are a part of growth. The more and more you can accept those mistakes and get better, the better off you'll be. So I will close the inaugural episode of the Long Island Legends podcast with those words of wisdom. Thank you guys very much for watching. And again, if you know of somebody that's looking to sell their house off market, please reach out to us at 631-333-SELL. I'm Jeremiah Dalton with Suffolk County House Buyers, signing off.